There is a room. You have been in it. Everyone has been in it, at least once. A room full of people, laughing, talking, the air thick with noise. And one person in the corner says nothing at all. And yet somehow, everyone in that room feels lighter simply because that person is standing there. No one can explain why. They will call it good energy. They will call it a vibe. They will reach for small words because the truth is too large for small words. But I will tell you what it actually is. It is a soul that has learned to carry the weight of other souls without breaking. And tonight, I want to tell you the truth about that soul. Because I believe, quietly, that it might be yours. Let us begin somewhere honest. Not with applause, not with music, but with a confession that most people carry in silence their entire lives. It is exhausting to feel everything. It is exhausting to walk into a room and know, before a single word is spoken, that the marriage in the corner is dying, that the man laughing loudest is the one closest to breaking, that the child playing quietly in the hallway has heard things no child should hear. It is exhausting to carry grief that does not belong to you home in your own chest, to lie awake at night turning over a stranger's sadness as though it were your own unfinished business. And if this has been your life, if you have spent years wondering why you feel so much, why you cannot simply look away, why the suffering of others lodges itself under your ribs like a splinter, then I do not come to pity you tonight. I come to tell you what you actually are. You are not broken. You are not too sensitive. A phrase thrown at children like a slap dressed up as advice. You are something rarer, something the modern world has almost no language left to describe, because the modern world has spent 3 centuries teaching us to distrust anything that cannot be measured, weighed, or monetized. But before the world had laboratories, it had elders. It had healers. It had the ones in every village, every tribe, every family, who could sit beside a dying man and somehow ease his fear without saying a single useful thing, because their presence itself was the medicine. That is the lineage you come from. That is the aura I want to speak about tonight. I have spent a great portion of my working life listening to people describe their inner lives, and I noticed something early on that never stopped astonishing me. The people who suffered the most from feeling too much were rarely mad. They were not diseased. They were, in fact, often the healthiest minds in the room, dressed in the clothing of a wound. What looked like oversensitivity was, underneath, an instrument, finely made, extraordinarily tuned, capable of picking up frequencies that other instruments simply could not register. A radio built to receive 1 station cannot be blamed for failing to catch 3. But an empath is a radio built to receive everything at once, all stations, all frequencies, all static and signal together, with no dial to turn it down. Of course it is exhausting. Of course it feels like too much. It is too much for a world that was built by those who feel too little. Here is the hidden truth I want to give you tonight, and I want you to hold it the way you would hold something fragile and expensive. The psyche is not one thing. It is not simply you alone, contained neatly behind your skin like water in a glass. The psyche of every human being reaches downward and outward into something shared, an underground river running beneath every individual mind, connecting stranger to stranger, generation to generation, grief to grief, joy to joy. Most people live their whole lives on the surface of that river, never once feeling its current. But some are born standing in the water. Some are born with their feet already wet. And they spend their whole lives wondering why everyone else seems so dry, so calm, so untouched by the same flood that soaks them through every single day. That is not a curse. That is a doorway. I want you to think, for a moment, about the people you have known who could walk into a hospital room and somehow make the dying feel less afraid. Not through words. Words are almost always too small for that kind of moment, but through something else entirely, a quality, a stillness, an attention so complete that the suffering person felt, for the first time in weeks, truly seen. We do not have good language for this quality, so we call it presence or aura or my personal favorite, because it is the most honest. We simply say, there was something about them, as though it were a mystery, a fog, an accident of personality. It is not an accident. It is a structure of the soul, built the same way a scar is built, through repeated contact with pain, until the tissue there becomes stronger, more supple, more capable of bearing weight than any other part of the body. This is what I mean when I say the empath's aura is rare. Not rare in the sense of a lottery ticket, a genetic fluke, a happy accident of birth. Rare in the sense that gold is rare, because it requires pressure and time and fire to become what it becomes. No one is born fully an empath in the way I am describing tonight. Sensitivity, yes. Some children arrive already tender, already porous, already weeping at the sadness of a song they cannot even understand yet. But the aura, the true aura, the one that calms, rooms, and steadies the dying and draws strangers close without a single word exchanged, that is forged. It is built the way a blade is built, through fire, through folding, through being struck again and again, until what remains is no longer soft, but is somehow, impossibly, both strong and gentle at once. Let me tell you about the shadow, because you cannot understand the empath's gift without first understanding the empath's darkness. Every human being carries a hidden half, the parts of ourselves too ugly, too shameful, too frightening to look at directly, so we push them down into a cellar of the mind and pretend the cellar does not exist. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding the staircase down. They build careers, families, routines, entire identities, purely to avoid ever hearing what is knocking beneath the floorboards. But the empath, the true empath, cannot avoid the cellar, because the empath hears not only their own knocking, but everyone else's too. Every room they walk into is full of cellars, full of trapdoors, full of the things people have buried and refused to name. And without ever asking to, the empath hears all of it at once. This is why so many empaths grow up believing something is deeply wrong with them. They feel the unspoken tension between their parents before the argument even begins. They sense the grief a friend refuses to admit to. They know, somehow, when someone is lying, not through evidence, but through a kind of ache in the chest, a wrongness in the air, a note played slightly out of tune that nobody else in the room seems to notice. And because no one around them seems to be experiencing the same flood, they conclude that the flood itself is the problem. They learn to shrink. They learn to apologize for their own perception. They learn, tragically, to distrust the very gift that could have made them whole. I want to say this clearly, because I think it is the single most important sentence in this entire speech. Your sensitivity was never the wound. The wound was growing up in a world that punished you for having it. Every archetype carries its shadow, and the empath's shadow has a name, though few people ever speak it aloud: the wounded healer. This is one of the oldest images in the human story, older than any religion, older than any nation, older than the written word itself. In every culture, in every mythology, there exists some version of the same figure, the one who is broken, and precisely because they are broken, becomes capable of healing others. The chieftain who was struck by lightning and lived, and afterward could speak with the dead. The physician who could cure every disease but his own. The one who fell into the deepest darkness and came back up carrying a lantern for everyone else's darkness, because he had already memorized every turn of that tunnel. If you are an empath, you already know this story, because you are already living it. You did not become sensitive to suffering by accident. Somewhere behind you, in childhood, in a relationship, in a loss you have never fully spoken about, there is a wound. And I do not say this to diminish your gift, to reduce it to nothing more than trauma dressed up in noble language. I say this because the wound and the gift are not two separate things. They are the same tissue, seen from two different angles. The very place where you were broken is the exact place where the light now gets in, and, more importantly, the exact place through which you now let other people's light out. But here is the danger, And I would be doing you a disservice if I did not speak of it honestly tonight. The wounded healer, unaware of their own wound, becomes not a healer at all, but a sponge. There is a critical difference between absorbing someone's pain and holding space for someone's pain. And it is a difference that determines whether your gift becomes a source of power or a slow, quiet form of self-destruction. The sponge takes on water until it is soaked through and can hold no more, until it begins to mold, to rot, to fall apart from the inside. The true healer is more like a riverbank, present to the water, shaped by the water over years, even worn down by the water at times, but never becoming the water itself. The water passes through. It does not stay. Most empaths never learn this distinction, and it destroys them slowly, over years, in ways that rarely announce themselves loudly. They become exhausted for reasons they cannot name. They begin to resent the very people they love most, without understanding why. They wake up one morning and realize they have not had an original feeling of their own in months. Every emotion in their body has been borrowed from someone else's life, someone else's crisis, someone else's unprocessed grief, until their own inner world has become a hallway other people's ghosts pass through on their way to somewhere else. This is not empathy. This is what happens when empathy has no boundary, no shape, no skin of its own. So let me give you the second hidden truth, and I want you to carry this one even more carefully than the first. The aura I am describing tonight is not simply the capacity to feel what others feel. Anyone broken open enough can do that. The rare aura, the one that heals rather than depletes, that calms rather than absorbs, that draws people toward warmth rather than pulling them into a shared drowning, belongs only to those who have done a very specific, very difficult piece of inner work. They have gone down into their own cellar. They have turned around and faced the thing that was knocking. They have looked their own shadow directly in the eye, named it, wrestled with it, and this is the crucial part, made a kind of peace with it, without pretending it was ever gone. This is what I call, in my quieter moments, the process of becoming whole. Not perfect, never perfect, but whole, in the sense that the circle is whole, even though it contains both its light side and its dark side within the same unbroken line. The person who has done this work no longer needs to absorb other people's suffering in order to understand it. They can simply recognize it, the way an old sailor recognizes a coming storm, not by drowning in the sea themselves, but by having weathered enough seas of their own to read the sky with total clarity. That recognition, that quiet fluency in the language of human pain, earned through your own descent and your own return, that is the aura. That is the thing people feel when they cannot explain what they feel. That is what makes a stranger sitting beside you on a train suddenly begin to weep about something they have not told another living soul in years. I have watched this happen more times than I can count, and it never stops moving me. A person walks into a room heavy with some unspoken grief, and they gravitate, almost against their own will, toward the one person in the room who says the least. Not the loudest voice, not the funniest one, or the most beautiful one, or the most successful one. They move toward the quiet one, the still one, the one whose eyes do not flinch away from difficult things. And within minutes, they are telling that stranger something they have never told their own family. Why? Because on some level beneath language, beneath conscious thought, the suffering person recognizes something. This one has been where I am. This one is not afraid of my darkness, because they have already stood in their own. This one will not need me to perform wellness for their comfort. I can finally put the mask down. That recognition, that permission to put the mask down, is the single rarest gift one human being can offer another. Rarer than money, rarer than advice, rarer even than love. Because love without this kind of safety often curdles into something anxious, something performative, something that demands its own reassurance in return. What the true empath offers is different. It asks for nothing back. It simply says, without a single word, you are allowed to be exactly what you are in this moment, and I am not going anywhere. Now, I know some of you listening tonight are sitting with an old, familiar ache, because you recognize everything I have said, and yet you are exhausted. You have given this gift away for years, to partners who took and never once asked what you needed, to friends who called you at midnight but never once asked how your own week had gone, to family members who treated your calm as a resource to be mined rather than a gift to be honored. And I want to say something to you plainly, because I think it is the thing you have been needing to hear for a very long time. An aura this rare must be protected, or it will be consumed entirely by people who mistake your bottomless patience for a bottomless supply. You were never required to be endlessly available in order to be worthy of love. You were never required to absorb every storm that walked through your door in order to prove that your sensitivity was valuable. The empaths who burn out, and so many of them do burn out, quietly, invisibly, behind a smile that took real effort to hold in place, are almost always the ones who never learned that boundaries and compassion are not opposites. They are, in fact, the same skill practiced in two directions. The healer who cannot say no eventually has nothing left to give the people who actually deserve it. Guarding your own well is not selfishness. It is the only way the well stays full enough for anyone to drink from it at all. I want to tell you something about synchronicity now, because it belongs in this conversation, whether the modern mind is comfortable with it or not. There is a particular kind of coincidence that happens far more often around people who have done this deep inner work. A person crosses their path at exactly the moment they most needed to hear a certain sentence. A memory surfaces at precisely the hour. A decision must be made. A stranger's passing comment answers a question that had been circling their mind for weeks, unspoken to anyone. Science, understandably, wants a mechanism for this. I will not pretend to give you a tidy mechanism tonight. What I will say is this. When a person's inner world becomes less cluttered with unprocessed pain, less crowded with defense and denial and performance, they become far more capable of perceiving connections that were always there, humming quietly beneath the surface of ordinary life, waiting only to be noticed. This is, I believe, one of the quiet secrets behind why true empaths so often describe an eerie sense of timing in their lives. Arriving at a hospital exactly when they were needed, calling a friend on the one night that friend was standing at the edge of something terrible, being handed, seemingly by accident, the exact words a grieving stranger needed to hear. It is not magic in the way a child imagines magic. It is attentiveness so refined, so thoroughly practiced, that it begins to look like magic to everyone who has never trained their own perception in the same way. The aura, in other words, is not simply felt. It arrives on time. Let me speak now about a fear I suspect many of you carry, even if you have never said it aloud. The fear that this sensitivity will always cost you more than it gives you. That you will always be the one who listens and rarely the one who is heard. That you will spend your whole life pouring yourself into cups that were never designed to be filled, while your own cup sits empty and unnoticed in the corner of every room you have ever entered. I will not lie to you and tell you this fear is baseless. It is not. The world, as it currently operates, does not reward quiet depth. It rewards volume. It rewards speed. It rewards the appearance of certainty far more than the substance of wisdom. And so the empath, moving slowly, feeling deeply, often finishes last in races that were never worth running to begin with. But I want to offer you a different measure of a life, because the measure the world hands you was never built with people like you in mind. There is a kind of person history barely remembers by name, and yet without whom entire families, entire communities, entire generations would have quietly collapsed under the weight of their own unspoken suffering. The grandmother who somehow held the whole family together after the war without ever raising her voice. The friend everyone called first when something terrible happened, not because that friend had answers, but because that friend had presence. The stranger who once, on the worst night of your life, said exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment and then vanished back into their own ordinary existence, never knowing they had saved you. History does not build monuments to these people, But the people they touched never forget them. Not once. Not for the rest of their lives. If that is the life you have been living, invisible in the grand record, unforgettable in the private one, I want you to understand something about legacy tonight, because I think it has been badly misdefined for you. Legacy is not the size of the crowd that remembers your name. Legacy is the number of people who are still standing, still breathing, still choosing to keep going, because at some critical moment, you were there and you did not look away. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, one of the largest things a human being can do with a single life. Empires fall. Fortunes are spent and forgotten within 2 generations. But the moment you sat with someone in their darkest hour and did not flinch, that moment lives inside them permanently, quietly reshaping every decision they make for the rest of their life, whether they ever consciously remember your face or not. Now I want to return to the shadow one final time, because I promised you the full truth tonight, not merely the comfortable half of it. The rare aura I have been describing is not a permanent state you achieve once and then keep forever, like a diploma hung on a wall. It is a practice. It must be renewed again and again, sometimes daily, sometimes in the middle of the night when your own unresolved grief tries to disguise itself as someone else's crisis. There will be days you fail at this. There will be days you absorb far more than you release. Days you snap at the people you love because you have been carrying invisible weight for weeks without naming it even to yourself. This is not evidence that you are not a true empath. This is evidence that you are human, and being human means the work is never finished. The wounded healer heals others precisely because they never stop tending their own wound. The day they believe themselves fully healed is the day they stop being useful to anyone, including themselves. I want to speak directly now to the version of you that has spent years apologizing for feeling too much. I want you to imagine, just for a moment, a different history. One where instead of being told to toughen up, to stop being so sensitive, to grow thicker skin like everyone else seemed to have grown, someone had instead knelt down beside you and said, "What you have is rare, and it will cost you, and it will also be the single greatest gift you ever give the people fortunate enough to know you. I cannot give you that childhood. No one can rewrite what already happened. But I can give you this moment, right now, and I can tell you the truth in it. It is not too late to stop apologizing for your own depth. The thickened skin the world told you to grow would not have made you stronger. It would have made you smaller. It would have sealed off the very instrument that allows you to sense what others cannot, to sit beside pain without needing to flee from it, to offer the rarest form of comfort that exists, the comfort of simply not being alone in a feeling. Do not thicken that skin now. Instead, learn to filter it. Learn the difference between an open door and an open wound. Learn to let feeling move through you like weather moves through a valley, fully present, fully felt, and then, eventually, gone, leaving the ground more fertile than it found it, rather than flooded beyond repair. There is a particular kind of loneliness that belongs almost exclusively to the empath, and I want to name it plainly, because naming it is often the first step toward surviving it. It is the loneliness of being deeply known by strangers and yet barely known by the people closest to you. It is the strange, aching irony of spending your entire life understanding everyone else's inner world in exquisite detail, while your own inner world goes largely unexamined by anyone but yourself. People come to you to be understood. Rarely do they think to ask whether you, too, need understanding. This loneliness is real, and it deserves to be spoken about honestly rather than romanticized into some noble form of martyrdom. If this loneliness belongs to you, hear me clearly. Seeking to be understood is not a betrayal of your gift. It is the completion of it. The healthiest empaths I have ever known are not the ones who gave endlessly and asked for nothing. That is not health. That is a slow erosion dressed up as virtue. The healthiest empaths are the ones who found, even if it took decades, even if it took real courage, at least one relationship where the giving flowed in both directions, where someone else learned to read their silences the way they had spent a lifetime learning to read everyone else's. You deserve that. not as a reward for good behavior, but simply because you are, underneath every gift you offer the world, also a person who needs to be held. Let me tell you, as we move toward the close of this evening, what I believe the aura ultimately is, stripped of every metaphor I have used so far. It is not mystical in the sense of being beyond explanation. It is mystical only in the sense that anything deeply true eventually starts to sound like poetry, because ordinary language was never built to hold it comfortably. The aura is simply this: a nervous system that has learned, through pain, through practice, through years of quiet, unglamorous inner work, to remain open without being destroyed by its own openness. That is all it is, and that is everything. Anyone can close themselves off and call it strength. Anyone can remain naively open and call it kindness, right up until the moment that openness breaks them. But to remain open and awake and unguarded, while having already done the difficult labor of understanding your own darkness so thoroughly that almost nothing in another person's darkness can ambush you anymore. That is rare in the truest sense of the word. Not rare like a gemstone found by luck in the dirt, but rare like a path walked by very few, because very few are willing to walk through the specific fire required to earn it. If you are still uncertain tonight whether this rare aura belongs to you, let me offer you a simple test, one I have offered many people over many years, and it has never once failed to reveal the truth. Think of the last time you sat with someone in real pain. Not performed pain, not the curated grief people post for an audience, but real, private, unglamorous suffering. Did you feel an urgent need to fix it, to solve it, to make it go away as quickly as possible so that your own discomfort at witnessing it would end? Or did you feel able to simply remain there, beside them, offering nothing but your undivided presence, trusting that presence itself was already doing the work? If it was the second, if you have ever sat in someone else's darkness without needing to immediately turn on a light, then you already carry the aura I have been describing all evening. You may not have named it before tonight, but you have lived it, likely more times than you can count, likely without ever once being thanked for it properly. I want to leave you with this, because I believe it is the truest thing I know. The world does not need more people who feel nothing. It has plenty of those already, and look at the state it is in. What the world desperately needs, now more than at almost any point I have witnessed, are people willing to feel everything and remain standing anyway. People willing to walk into rooms heavy with unspoken grief and not flinch. People willing to sit beside the dying, the frightened, the ashamed, the ones everyone else has quietly stopped calling, and simply stay. Not to fix, not to perform wisdom, just to stay, fully present, until the person beside them remembers what it feels like to not be alone. If that is who you are, and I suspect, if you have listened this far, that it is, then I want you to stop treating your depth as an inconvenience the world has forced you to manage. I want you to start treating it as what it actually is, a rare, hard-won, deeply necessary form of light. Not the loud light of the stage, but the quiet light of the lantern carried down into someone else's darkest hour, precisely because you have already walked your own tunnel and know exactly where the difficult turns are. So carry it carefully, and carry it with boundaries, and carry it without apology. Let it cost you what it must cost, because some things are worth their cost. But do not, ever again, mistake your sensitivity for a weakness the world was right to shame out of you. It was never a weakness. It was always, from the very beginning, the rarest kind of strength there is. The strength to remain open in a world that has given you every reason to close, and to offer that openness again and again to strangers and loved ones alike as the quiet, priceless gift it has always been. That is the hidden truth. That is the aura, and if it is yours, and I believe, for many of you listening tonight, it is, then the world is fortunate you were ever born into it at all.